Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Council Cabinet meeting. I'm Councillor David Greenhouse, Leader of the Council. I'll be chairing today's Cabinet. I'm joined by my fellow Cabinet colleagues, officers of the Council and representatives from all opposition groups on the Council. Can I just remind colleagues that if they would like to speak, please indicate in the chat. And I'll bring you in the order that you indicate. So moving first of all to item 1 on the agenda, have we any declarations of interest? No, we have none. Item 2 is any urgent business, if I have any, and I have none. So moving on to item 3, please, and can I ask Mr Mulholland if we have any apologies for absence, please?
Just one, Councillor Ismail and Councillor McMulkin's coming in place.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 4, which is minutes of the last meeting. They are being circulated and are enclosed. Any questions from anyone regarding any issues that are not coming up in the agenda? No, thank you. So can we have those passed as a true record? Thank you. I'm moving to item 5, which is GMSF. And the papers have all been circulated. It's been a long journey to get to this point today. I believe before I bring in the Executive Cabinet member and the Director, I just want to give thanks first of all, not only to everyone who's worked on this, but to the very positive cross-party approach there has been to GMSF within Bolton Council, and I need to pay tribute to all the parties who have worked together. I think probably on this subject more than any, we have spent hours debating during full council meetings, and it was that commitment that led to a brownfield sites policy within Bolton that has led us to be I think we can be very proud that we are the only borough within Greater Manchester that has no development whatsoever, housing development on our green belt. It is that commitment following consultations that sites have been removed, that we at Bolton have really listened, and that has been due to the cross-party working on this over a number of years. So we are at the position now where we finally are in the recommendations before us. But I would like to bring in, first of all, Councillor Hewitt, who is the Executive Cabinet member responsible for this. Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Leader. Purpose of the report is to approve the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework for publication and submission. It is recommended to Cabinet that it approves the GMSF publication draft for 2020 for publication pursuant to Regulation 19 of the Town and Country Planning Regulations 2012 for a period of representation between the 1st of December 2020 and the 26th of January 2021. It recommends that Council approve the GMSF publication draft 2020 for submission to the Secretary of State for examination following the period of representations. It delegates to the Director of Place Authority to approve the relevant statement of common grounds required pursuant to the MPPF Framework 2019. Delegates authority to the lead Chief Executive in consultation with the Portfolio Leader to make minor or non-material amendments to the GMSF publication draft 2020 and background documents prior to their publication. Members will be aware of the background to this report. The 10 Greater Manchester local planning authorities have been jointly preparing the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. Adopting the GMSF would become part of the development plan for Bolton. Bolton's development plan currently consists of 4 elements: Bolton's core strategy, Bolton's allocation plan, the Greater Manchester Minerals Plan, the Greater Manchester Waste Plan. Adoption of the GMSF will replace parts of the core strategy and change the allocations plan policies map. A list of the core strategy policies that will be replaced is contained in Appendix 2. The report concerns the publication and submission of the GMSF. Cabinet has the power to approve publication. Publication is the stage at which representations are invited on the content of the GMSF. Following the representation period, the 10 councils would submit the GMSF to the Secretary of State for examination, but it is important to note submission must be approved by a meeting of the council. GMSF processes are set out more fully in the report, but briefly in terms of GMSF process, which brings us to this point. In November 2014, the Association of Greater Manchester Authorities AGMA Executive Board recommended to the 10 Greater Manchester local authorities that they agree to prepare the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. Further, the recommendation was that AGMA be appointed by the 10 authorities to prepare the GMSF on their behalf. February 2015, Bolton Council resolved to support the preparation of the GMSF and for the preparation to be carried out by AGMA on our council's behalf. The first draft of the GMSF was published for consultation in October 2016. A further consultation on the revised draft GMSF took place between January and March 2019. Progress on the GMSF was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, AGMA Executive Board in September 2020 agreed that the GMSF would be progressed as a joint development plan of the 10 authorities. Consultation on the publication plan would take place in November-December of 2020. A meeting of the AGMA Executive Board on the 30th of October 2020 considered a resolution to recommend to the 10 authorities that the GMSF will be published and submitted to the Secretary of State. The publication stage is a formal consultation on the plan, and it provides an opportunity for organisations and individuals to submit their views on the content of the plan. The ultimate decision to adopt must be taken by each of the 10 full councils. Submission requires approval of each of the 10 full councils of the GM local authorities. If major new issues arise at the publication stage, there would need to be further consultation. Finally, I think it's worth noting the impact of GMSF on housing supply within the Borough of Bolton. The GMSF proposes that out of the 179,090 homes in Greater Manchester, 13,026, which is just under 7.4% of the total within the 10 boroughs, will be in Bolton. It is considered that the supply of sites in the urban areas of the Borough of Bolton will be sufficient to meet that requirement, and it is not proposed to allocate any sites in the green belt for housing. Thank you, Leader, and I'll hand over to Jerry.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Council members. Not to repeat what Councillor Hewitt has said, the paper provides the background to the GMSF, the plan preparation process and the publication plan. It sets out how and reminds people how it's about developing GM up to the year 2037 with a focus on jobs, homes, environment and brownfield land being developed in preference to Greenbelt. How the plan seeks to get a limited release of Greenbelt. And in paragraphs 417, 418 and 419, it sets out what the specific implications are for Bolton in terms of new housing development, new employment land and so on. It then goes on to note the comprehensive evidence base that's been collected and is prepared and sits behind this plan. How we've prepared for consultation during the COVID period in section 7, before finally moving on to section 8, which is some of the additional impacts and implications of the plan. Recommendations are set out in section 12 and in the front cover, and I'm pleased to say that we have Anne Morgan here today from the GM Combined Authority, who's been really front and centre of preparing this document for some time now. And she'll be able to help us answer any questions that members have got, along with Paul Whittingham, my Assistant Director of Development and Regeneration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Toby. And welcome to Anne, who I know has worked tirelessly on this over many years. Welcome. to Anne from GMCO, who will assist us in any questions that need to be answered in terms of detail. I have a few indicators already, so first of all, if I can bring in Councillor Hayes.
Thank you very much, Leader. It seems to me going on almost as long as Coronation Street, this, doesn't it? I think this is the third time that it's come, or almost come forward. I'd like to support what you said at the beginning about we've got to thank people for all the hard work, and there's been a lot of constructive work going on, both with members and with officers, and I think we've got to give credit for that. I'm very concerned that we do protect our green belt from both housing and employment land. We've done a good job on the housing side, but unfortunately there's very large swathes of West Bolton which would in fact be going to employment land, and I think that's a big problem we've got. I'm not sure if GMS is the right plan. Housing numbers are based on 2014 numbers, as I understand it. Since then, we both had Brexit and the COVID pandemic, which will have a big impact on our future economy and our future housing need. And I think it's out of date before it even can come into force. I'm concerned about the way we're trying to consult over Christmas, and at the moment, whether we'll still be in lockdown or whether it'll be in tier 3 or tier 4 or something else, I don't know. That will prevent people having the proper ability to consult and give their views back. The government's white paper, which we discussed only a couple of weeks ago, is proposing very big changes to the way that plans will be drawn up, and and also the way that housing numbers are calculated. And I think, to be honest, that going into it at this stage, very much too late, I think it's a mistake, and I think we're crazy actually to be going ahead with it when it's likely to change. In the event of it coming to council, and we know that it may not because no date's been allocated yet, and if one of the other 9 councils was not to go ahead with it, then it wouldn't come to council, because as I understand it, it's 10 or nothing that go ahead. In the event of it coming to council, we'll vote against it. Now, I'm sure it would still get through Bolton Council, because I suspect most of the other groups will vote for it, but for the reasons I said, we would vote against it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Just to answer just a few of those points, or just to comment on them. First of all, as you all know, Wingates is in West Horton, which is the area you refer to, is the subject of a ministerial call-in at the moment. So we await the outcome of that. So we can't actually, that will be determined in itself by the result of that call-in. In terms of and I understand your frustration on that and the implications, and I know it's shared by many local councillors in that area. I think your other comments about the overall about the timing, I think the phrase "better late than never." If we know that our greenbelt land has been over the last few years, while this has been rumbling on, if I can use that term, has been under considerable pressure. And we have lost many a greenbelt application at appeal. And that would continue, there's no doubt about it. And there's nowhere probably than the west of the borough that's been hardest hit. In places like West Horton, in places like Horwich, where greenbelt has been put under further jeopardy because of our own planning committee refusing, developers going to appeal, and unfortunately the appeal going against us. So this idea that we then carry on this limbo, carry on the uncertainty, and actually people of West Horton and Horwich, and indeed in my areas, and if you look at places like Horrocks Fold in Astley Bridge that was clearly in some of the agendas early on. Those swathes of land in Bradshaw, in Bromcross, in the east of the borough, swathes of land all over now could be, if this doesn't go through, could fall foul of the appeal structure. And I think that is important to understand that. That is not to say that I understand any encroachment of Greenbelt is regrettable anywhere, but I do enforce, and of course this will mean nothing to the people who it directly impacts on in West Horton, but I say without a doubt Bolton has got the least incursion in its Greenbelt of any other authority within the GM conurbation. And of that, I do pay credit to the cross-party work that we did early on, the ability that sites were removed, and the cross-party agreement we had early on as well in how we moved forward to find the best scheme for the borough. We have without doubt come up with the best scheme possible. You're absolutely right to point out that another borough may vote against it, and therefore we are back to square one, as it were, in the process. But I do genuinely believe that as a council and as authority, we've genuinely done our best to make sure we have the least incursion in the Greenbelt as possible. Regarding the consultation, that will be, my understanding, a decision made at GM level. Obviously, when this timetable was set, we were unaware we'd be entering into lockdown, but of course the consultation starts from the 1st of December. Lockdown finishes on the 2nd, straight through to the 26th of January, the consultation. You know, this may be a moving feast. I don't know, Anne, if you wish to comment on that at all in terms of any conversations that may take place, but my understanding is the consultation will go ahead as planned. I've just got, Andy, you ought to come in there.
Hello, Anne. We can't hear you.
I think Anne may be waiting for the red box, Ian.
We still can't hear you, Anne. John, are you able to do anything?
I can't from my end. Anne, it would appear your microphone isn't working.
The alternative, if it's not working, Anne, is to dial in on a normal phone, and I can let you in that way.
Is it working now?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I can hear you now.
Sorry,
Yes.
I've changed the microphone. Apologies for that. I very, very quickly, no decision has obviously been made around lockdown. It has come as quite a surprise, or unusually at the last minute. But we clearly will keep under review what it might mean. So we're speaking to all of the districts about whether or not things like libraries are likely to remain open, and we'll just keep that constantly under review as we go through the approval process, and then may need to take that back to leaders if we feel we need to, about whether or not we need to pause, extend, or print hard copies, or however we might do that. So still a way to go, I think.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to bring Councillor Hayes back in because he's asked to come back in before I bring in Councillor Hornby, if that's all right. Councillor Hayes.
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. As I say, I think we've got to give credit to everybody who worked so hard. But I hope the lockdown finished on the 2nd of November. I think there seems some doubt in government circles about that from yesterday. But let's hope, otherwise it'll do a lot of damage to this economy. But as I understand it, we have a new method, or going to have a new method, of calculating what Bolton should be building in terms of housing. And the indications I have is that will lower the targets we have. And we know that there have been a lot of approvals recently, and we've lost our appeals because we were short of our targets. Now, as I understand it, we've been very close to our targets. It may even be that we're in excess of our target. I don't know the latest position, but it could be that could be very relevant. But I take everything else you say.
Thank you. I don't know if Paul Whittingham, you wish to comment on that?
Thank you, Leader. I think the relevant point for members is that with the GMSF moving forward, that the figure for housing numbers required to be delivered within Bolton would actually be lower, certainly in the first few years, which would assist the council and assist in terms of the availability of sites. If GMSF doesn't go forward, then the potential for council to have to deliver higher numbers is very much present. So I think the focus has got to be to move forward along with the other districts with the GMSF to make sure that there's a supply of houses across the whole of GMSF or across the whole of GM, rather than Bolton having to try and find the additional sites that it would have to find if GMSF didn't go forward. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Hornby. You're on mute, Sean.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Leader. We've come a long way to get where we are today, and I would hope that throughout Greater Manchester this is voted for, although it is highly unlikely that it will be, knowing what we already know from at least 2 other local authorities. But it is a good deal for Bolton, and it does protect most of our green belt, and officers and all political parties have put a lot of work into this. If it doesn't go through, we have all got areas within our wards. We've got an application due in any time now, which will affect 2 pieces of green belt along the canal, whereby even if planning committee was likely to refuse it, there's every chance that it would go to appeal and we would lose, and that green belt would be lost. I would just like to ask though, if you recall, we have been saying all the way through this, because of delays, and one of the delays was because of the mayoral election, and it was put off for 12 months, as we all know. But how far have we got with our own plan, just in case this fails, so that we have some way of protecting our own land with our unitary development plan? And I just want to know, are we still proceeding with that? And if we are, how far have we got with that? Thank you, Leader.
Well, we certainly are proceeding with that. I do want to just remind that we didn't have a full cross-party agreement on that. It was a motion put, I remember, a few years ago by a councillor that is no longer a councillor, Councillor Zoe Robinson, who proposed that there could be problems ahead with GMSF and that we should be building up our own plan as a safety net. And I don't need to remind council at that time that was voted down. The Conservative motion was not approved at that council meeting, but certainly the administration made it very clear in its first year that we should be working towards that. But clearly that has to go through a process, Councillor Hornby, and that process normally takes in advance of a year in just the consultation process, in terms of coming up with a plan that you then have to consult with your residents, and then they come back with proposals, and then it's very similar to the process we go through. So work has begun on that. I will be the first to admit that COVID has probably slowed that down, but the work has begun. It was a clear intention was given from this administration that we did need to be working on that safety net, but it is a shame that that safety net hadn't been worked up considerably. It could have been started with a vote at full council. I'm going probably back about 2.5 years now, probably. That could have been an indication then that plan could have been, and we could have almost a ready-made plan for this very purpose that we're discussing today. But yes, that is, the safety net will get in place if certain events unfold, as we think they might do over the coming weeks, and that plan will be needed to be produced as soon as possible as it can be. Thank you, Councillor Hornby.
Thank you, Leader.
I've got Councillor Donaghy next, please. Councillor Donaghy.
Thanks, Thanks, Leader. Yeah, I remember that vote in council well, but you have to remember with respect that the conditions that were obtaining at that time were somewhat different, and as far as we were united across GM and on the basis that the other authorities would take up the slack from Bolton and in fact help us out. So as Sean quite rightly said earlier, the deal that we got for Bolton as a combined political force is a very, very good deal. And my fear is if you start messing about with stuff and other people start sticking their oars in, then Bolton could end up with a considerably worse deal. And the fact that it would be wonderful if we could go it alone and do a UDI on this, I still feel without that backup from the rest of GM, we would come off considerably worse based on the numbers of properties that are required than the deal we have at the moment. And I really hope that the deal that has been worked out with yourself and others, as you say, you've burnt the midnight oil, David, and you've come back with a good deal. Let us hope that it does go through, because the deal that is there at the moment, I repeat again, is a good deal for Bolton. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And you're absolutely right. It's remiss that we have, you know, between 1,500 and 2,000 houses that are taken, allocation taken for us from Salford and Manchester. That is extra houses that our allocation we would have to find. And I appreciate Councillor Hayes's point that numbers would come down slightly, but they would not come down enough that we would have to find sites for those extra houses if we went it alone. So it is a time. I mean, it is. I know there's different political views across the whole of the conurbation, but I'm pleased that, you know, the work that we have done, as you say, Councillor Donaghy, the work that we've done together and the last administration, because they were the ones that actually got the allocation from Manchester and Salford sealed, that we've been listened to, the public, that sites have been removed, and that we are now got Bolton over the line of where we are over the two administrations for the deal that we see where we are today. We will certainly be faced with some very, very challenging circumstances should this deal not go through. And even in the boroughs that where there is the challenge currently and where we understand there to be the challenge, there are also boroughs that if they had to go it alone would be considerably worse off. So it's a shame that in some areas politics has sadly had to come into it. And I think that's down to the amount of work, as I said early on, that we all did from all parties, the cross-party conversations, the hours we spent discussing this at full council, you know, to get agreement and ways forward. So thank you for your comments anyway, Martin. And I'm going to bring in another Martin, Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to make really a couple of comments. The first one, of course, is we haven't quite got this across the line. It could well be rejected by one or more than one other authority, and we may well have to fall back on our own plan. But I think what Councillor Donaghy has said is correct, and I know certainly in terms of what other AGMA authorities think, I know for a fact that Bolton has got a very good deal out of this. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. One of the first AGMA meetings that I attended, in fact, it was the very first AGMA meeting I attended, because I was new and I arrived a little bit late and wasn't introduced. People didn't know who I was, and the focus of the discussion, it was a meeting on housing, and the focus of the discussion was how Bolton had got away with giving up so little of its greenbelt, and that Bolton really had got away with well, I'll not use the colourful language, but they said Bolton had got an extremely good deal, and they were quite perplexed as to how Bolton had managed to pull this off. So that's great credit to officers. It's credit to the previous administration. I don't mind giving credit where credit's due. They did get a very good deal for Bolton, and it does protect massive swathes of greenbelt right across the west of Bolton, which would be under considerable threat, are under considerable threat, and we've seen, you know, that greenbelt can be lost quite easily, and I think this plan affords us the opportunity of protecting large swathes of greenbelt right across Bolton West for many years to come, and I think we shouldn't pass that up. So I think we've got a good deal, but I think more importantly, other AGMA authorities are quite annoyed with Bolton that Bolton have got such a good deal, and I think it's probably, given all the circumstances, it's the best that we can do. So thanks, Leader. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Zaman.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, just very quickly, I think we have done a lot of work on this, and this proposal needs to go through. And there is always a tension between economic development and greenbelt protection, and I think we need to pay some attention to that in order to create employment opportunities for our residents. Ultimately, at some point, there will be some encroachment onto our greenbelt, and I think we as politicians, we need to recognise that, and we need to take into account the needs of our residents. So I think we should all support this, and I'm quite happy that this proposal is where it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zaman. I've nobody else indicated, so for Cabinet, please, the recommendations are outlined as Councillor Hewitt spoke. So can I just ask you to unmute and signify your agreement to the recommendations, please?
Agreed.
Aye.
Agreed.
Agreed. Oh, I can't vote.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't worry, the more the merrier. Right, that is passed. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to item 6, which is Bolton Council's COVID-19 10-point response plan. And if I can hand over, please, to John Dyson, please.
Thank you, Leader. This item is in many respects a short but nevertheless important piece, as it reflects the Council's COVID-19 response today and moving forward, a document that perhaps has even greater importance given the lockdown announcements over the weekend. But I must say that it's in many respects a communication piece rather than a technical document or report per se. Over the last 4 to 6 weeks, officers supporting the response and recovery efforts have been reflecting on how the Council is and will continue to respond to COVID-19, but also the significant amount of work that has taken place over the last 7 months. Whilst there have undoubtedly been many individual updates through the Council's usual communication channels, it was felt that we needed to capture this work as a collective piece and make it more visible to members of the public. We're therefore proposing to do this in the form of a 10-point plan, and subject to Cabinet's agreement today, the intention will be to publicise that on the Council's website. It's not my intention to run through the specific detail of the plan, as a copy has obviously been provided in advance of today's meeting, but you will note that the plan highlights a range of key response and recovery activities relating to health and well-being, our humanitarian response, economic recovery and business support, ongoing provision of education in the borough and organisational resilience, amongst other things. Most importantly, perhaps, and intentionally as well, the plan has been designed to be simple, clear and concise. At the same time, I should also say that the plan has not been designed to drive performance. It's very much a narrative. The corporate plan will continue to be our key reference point in respect of progress against key priorities and the associated quantitative and qualitative measures. But it is, however, hoped that the 10-point plan will, of course, inform future discussions on the corporate plan and the 2030 vision refresh, and will ensure that both response and recovery, but most importantly, our one council approach, if I can say that, are captured in the next iteration of these key strategic documents. So at the risk of reiterating the piece at the start of the short presentation, as I say, this is a small piece, but nonetheless one that we felt was important to share with the Cabinet. And as far as the recommendations in the report are concerned, and you may come back to them, Leader, really we are asking Cabinet to first and foremost note the content of the report, but to approve Bolton Council's COVID-19 10-point response plan for publication on the Council's website. But stemming from that, then there is a proposal to produce and publish a strategic equalities impact assessment associated with the Council's response to the pandemic. So I'll perhaps pause there. Obviously happy to take any questions, and that may involve input as well from other colleagues and officers on this call, given the wide-ranging nature of the 10-point plan. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, John, and it's an important piece of work, and I'm glad we're able to bring this to Cabinet. Are there any questions? It is reasonably self-explanatory and goes into considerable detail. So I'd personally like to thank officers for the work they've done in producing this. So the recommendation for Cabinet is to know the content of the report and approve the Bolton Council's COVID-19 10-point response plan for publication, and approve the production and publication of a strategic equalities impact assessment associated with the Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So can I just ask colleagues on Cabinet to agree to that, please?
Agreed.
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 Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you for that, John. We now move on to items 7 and 8, which we will be taking together, if that's all right. And I'm going to hand over to the double act that is the Chief Executive and the Deputy Chief Executive, Tony and Sue. Thank you. Tony first, I think.
John Duckett, can you put the presentation up, please?
Yeah, just 1 second.
Thanks, John. Whilst the presentation's coming up, I'll just say a few words. Thank you, Leader, and thank you, councillors, for your time and patience this afternoon. We apologise for you seeing some of this content again. The content has been slightly updated since our first set of conversations a few weeks ago. But as this is a public meeting and it's on public record, we just wanted to make absolutely clear about the nature of the challenges the council faces from a fiscal point of view as a consequence of COVID-19, and for the avoidance of doubt, we just want to make sure that the facts are fully understood. It will deal with item 7.8 as the leader said, but we'll do that through the presentation, and then between myself, Sue and the leader, we'll pick up any specific questions that there might be. If we can have the next slide, please, John. Next one, please, John. Okay. In my 35 years working in public sector at a senior level and at junior levels, this is by far the toughest set of financial challenges that I have ever known. And I think, to be fair, it's about putting them in context. Prior to COVID, we did have a 2-year window from 2020 to detail and deliver a strategic approach. And that was at that point to deliver cuts of around 26.5 million. So in summary, we would have had in May elections of this year. On the basis of that, we would have then planned for 2 years because we would have had a fallow year are the basis of how we are going to deliver what would still been a challenging figure of 26.5. I think the other point to highlight is that a number of administrations over a number of years have used reserves for either smoothing out budget pressures in terms of some of the challenges, or for kind of averting some difficult decisions that have been required. And when we had the corporate peer review in June 2018, and if you recall, that was made up of politicians and officers from elsewhere in the country, they made that comment. And they stated very clearly that relying on use of current reserves to fund year-on-year budget pressures cannot continue at current pace, and therefore more difficult decisions will be required in future years. That was their professional and political view at the time. And as we've said before, and I'm going to say it again for the public record, spending your savings on your mortgage eventually runs out. You eventually get into a difficult place where you have no more savings to pay for something which is a recurring revenue consequence. And that's, in some senses, some of the things that we've been doing with reserves for some time. Next slide, please, John. As a consequence, we are at a place where we've described it previously as a perfect storm, and it really is a perfect storm. You know, as politicians, that the way councils receive money has been significantly changed in recent years. No longer direct grants from government, but for Bolton and for GM authorities, as an example, our reliance is upon business rates for income and council tax. As a consequence of COVID-19, that inevitably has had some impact on our ability to deliver savings or to maintain the level of services we provide. It's not the total answer. There have been pressures from previous years, but this has really amplified the challenge to a scale which is very significant. Next slide, please, John. Before we get into the kind of remaining slide about the context in which we're operating, we've put this in because it was just to make clear that this is not going to come without some pain or some tough decisions or choices. This is a pie chart which explains how the budget on a net basis in millions is divided between the different parts of council's business. And as you will see, if I take, for example, adult services, that's 67.4 million. 33% of the money we spend is on adult services. If you go to children's, can't quite see the numbers there on my slide, but I think it's 51 million, 25%. So the People Directorate, as we previously discussed, has a significant proportion, as was originally envisaged, of the services. If you move round to Place, that's currently got 35.7 million, 17%. Corporate Resources, 33.4, 16%. And Public Health with 9%, 18.1 million. What that means is that approaches which are about protecting certain parts of business are increasingly challenging when the numbers are so as significant as they are as we face now. If we're going to next slide, please, John. This was our people. So there we are. So 37% of the money we spend is on employee costs, 63 non-employee costs. So from our point of view, again, this will mean, unfortunately and sadly, that there will be further job losses. There is no way, given the type of business that we are supplying and delivering, that there will not be consequences for our staffing across the council. And that's really tough at a time when the council staff across the piece are working very hard on sustaining and delivering our response to COVID-19. And they have gone the extra mile throughout this last eight or 9 months, and unfortunately we're in a place that at this time we're having to find some significant savings, which will mean some job losses. John, next slide, please. So my last slide before handing over to Sue, and again, for the public record and the avoidance of doubt, I want to make sure that these comments are really truly understood. So local government is a great success. It does brilliant things, but sometimes because we keep making the money go further and because we improve in terms of efficiencies and productivity, that sometimes people think, well, there we are, we've been in this place before. This is not as bad as it is. Well, I'm sorry to say this is a really tough financial challenge we have. This is not a false assessment. And if we do not deliver our statutory responsibilities financially, we will be what's called Section 114 territory. which is where the council inevitably becomes bankrupt or insolvent, and that means we would be subject to intervention, which means that someone else or some other partners would run the council to deliver the necessary savings. We are not there, and we're not saying this is imminent, but we would not be doing our job myself and Susan 151 if we didn't say to you that we are in a very tough position. The second thing to say, and again, this is always a challenge, that the scale of the gap, which Sue's going to talk about, can either increase or decrease. We have just about to commence a second lockdown, not exactly the same as the first one, but we're going to have a lockdown. What that means for businesses, for people's livelihoods, for people who have to pay for their mortgages, people who pay council tax, etc., we don't know. What it means for some businesses that have relied on people going into them because of hospitality, we don't know. What that could mean is that the level of income deficiencies that the council has could increase, not decrease. On the other hand, it could be that things could significantly improve the other side of Christmas, and therefore on the basis of that we might feel the situation change again to our benefit. But what we are having to stress today to you all is that the scale of that gap is not set, and it could increase or decrease to our advantage or disadvantage. The next point is linked to the fact that because of the timescale, we have really just about 1 year. So transformational activity, i.e. doing things in a very strategic way, modernising the way we do things, looking at new ways of working, sometimes requires more time. It isn't going to just happen within 6 or 7 months. Sometimes it takes 1.5 years to 2 years to really get a new business model, a new approach. Unfortunately, as you know from your briefings that we've had, COVID-19 has been with us all the way through. We've continued to try and deliver all the council services, but we have a plethora of new requirements, a plethora of new expectations, a plethora of new responsibilities. And again, this is not political. Although we have had money from government, we've had to do that with sometimes redeploying resources or people or creating new activities. The fact that we're holding these meetings in this way is an example of something that has significantly changed in the last few months. We could never have done this 9 months ago. It's a great opportunity. However, we will focus more on digital. We will focus more on doing things the right way. But some of the work we need to do will have to take some longer time. But time is not on our side. And as it says below it, we need to start taking cash out now. We have to think about cashable savings at scale. So what we mean by that is, if we're saying we're going to spend a lot of time, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, to generate a saving of 20,000, it's not going to be big enough. We are going to have to think in chunks of monies approaching hundreds of thousands to half millions, etc. That's not to say we're being complacent. That's not to say we won't look at every penny we spend, but we have to do this at scale because of the size of the challenge. And the last point is something that you know very well from our conversations, is that we have to negotiate and agree the budgets across 8 political groups. It doesn't really matter, and I'm not being rude here when I say this, it doesn't matter which colour of political party or group is running this organisation in May next year. It won't make one difference to the choices or the decisions that you may have to face. We're going to have to negotiate and agree a budget across 8 political groups. If the financial position of the council improves and we have a settlement from government, for example, in Christmas, then that will be of significant benefit for us, potentially. However, we just don't know at this precise moment in time. So therefore, we are having to take the responsibility with yourselves and the 8 political groups to try and reach some agreement on some of the difficult choices we have moving forward. And at that point, I'll hand over to Sue, who's going to take us through some of the technical aspects of the reports. Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. So we could go to the next slide, please, John. Okay, so in looking at our medium-term financial strategy for next year, obviously one of the key considerations is how much COVID has impacted on our budgets in a permanent basis, because obviously in the current year we're receiving additional funding for the additional costs and loss of income. So what we know at the moment is that COVID will increase our cuts target by £10.5 million, and there's 3 main reasons for that. The first one is the loss of business rates and council tax income that we are seeing in the current financial year. So the way that we are required to account for that is that we don't take that as a pressure on the budget in the current year. we have to account for it a year in arrears. So in next financial year, the £12 million that we are seeing and currently expecting to lose in the current year would hit in next year. Helpfully, the government a few weeks ago announced that we could spread that loss over the next 3 financial years. So the impact in the following 21-22 financial year will be £4 million. In addition to that, we know that Manchester Airport Group is no longer in a situation where it will be able to pay any dividend. We currently receive just over £6 million in dividend. Of that, we have 4.1 million built into our core budget. So we need to write that out. We will no longer receive it. And then on top of that, we are currently estimating additional costs and loss of other types of income for about £2.2 million. Now, clearly, this is something that we're going to keep a very close eye on over the next few months before we get to setting our full budget. For the next slide, please, John. So, looking at next financial year, in total, we currently estimate that there will be a requirement to save £37.2 million in one financial year. As Tony said earlier, the starting point for next year was always going to be £16.5 million. That was in the budget report that was approved back in February. There's been some adjustments to that, up and down. We're bringing down the estimate for the pay award into next financial year down from 3% to 2%, so a slight reduction there. But then we've recognised a number of additional pressures, both new coming into next year relating to COVID, but also pressures that have been managed within departments over the last few years through use of reserves. But quite clearly, as Tony has already alluded to, you can only spend your reserves once. Once they have gone, you need to find a more substantial way of dealing with those pressures. So in total, we are looking at £37.2 million, which will need to come out in one financial year. The next slide, please, John. So a number of assumptions behind that figure. Firstly, around council tax, one of our key sources of income. We are assuming that we will be able to bring in an additional 2% for the adult social care levy that we've been able to levy over the last few years. That will bring us an additional £2.3 million, which will go directly into the adult social care budget. We are also assuming that we will be able to bring the general levy for council tax up to an increase of 1.99%, which is the current referendum limit. Now, we are dependent on a government announcement for that. Both of those are at the behest of the government, and we haven't yet had that announcement for next financial year. And the third assumption around council tax is around growth. Normally, we assume a growth in our base number of properties paying council tax for 100% aggregated together. We assume that will increase by 0.5% in year. For next year, we are assuming that that is zero. Now, that is not to say that there won't be an increase in housing across the borough, but set against that increase will be the number of people that we will see moving on to council tax support. So they no longer pay 100% of their council tax, so that aggregated together reduces the amount that we receive in income. Another key source of income for the council is business rates, and again we are assuming an inflationary increase of 2%. That is set by the government, so we await that announcement. We are assuming that 100% business rates retention continues across Greater Manchester, so everything that is collected in the borough is retained by the council. And then the third point to flag up is around the grants. At the moment, any business in the leisure, retail, hospitality sector is receiving a relief on their business rates. So they pay nothing in this financial year, and the council reclaims that amount of income from the government under a Section 31 grant. Now, that has been really good in this financial year for two reasons. Firstly, for those businesses, it's one less a bill to pay for a sector which has been particularly hardest hit during the pandemic. But for the council, it removes the risk of collection. So as long as that business is in operation, we are able to claim that money. But what we don't know yet is if that relief is going to be extended into next financial year, because if it isn't, then that is, I mean, it's at least 43 million. It's looking to be a little bit higher, but that's 43 million pounds worth of income that the council will need to collect off businesses if they are still in business. So it's a strain on the business, and the council takes on a risk of collection. So again, we await that announcement from the government. The next slide, please, John. So reserves is a question that I'm asked quite a lot about at every budget meeting. So in total, we were estimating we will need about £16.5 million worth of reserves to balance the budget in this financial year. When we set the budget in February, we knew we needed at least 6 million, and then add on to that non-COVID demand pressures that departments are managing through use of reserves, but also COVID pressures. So that is after the government funding and after we take into account any underspends that are accruing within departments, because we are doing less of certain items. So we set them against the additional costs that we are facing in each area. So we were expecting to use about £6 million worth of our reserves. Now, quite recently, the government has announced its latest round of emergency funding, which happily is around about the £6 million. So all else being equal, that will release £6 million worth of reserves to balance the budget into next year, which is really important because we need to have a strong base of reserves to keep us safe in balancing the budget. It keeps us away from me having to issue a Section 114 notice, but quite clearly we need to keep a very close eye on the loss of income and the additional costs that we may see for the remainder of this financial year. Can you go to the next slide, please, John? So this slide is a snapshot from our statement of accounts. So this is the position as we closed the accounts at the end of March. So a lot of detail on there. So the important figure is the middle column at the bottom, 76 million. So at the beginning of this financial year, we started with £76 million worth of revenue reserves, which, as you've heard me say many times, are allocated for specific purposes and areas of risk. And this is important because if we need to use between 10 and 16 million pounds of our reserves to balance this year, that figure reduces to 66 million. Now, if that's how we end the year, and then out of that we need to balance 37 million pounds worth of cuts, there's not that much left when we look at all the demands and all the risks faced by the council. And this is why we are not in any position whatsoever to use our reserves for the next round of the budget to defer any cuts. We have been in that fortunate position in the past, but we absolutely are not in that position going forward. Any reserves that can be allocated into a cash flow pot to balance the budget must be kept there. Any additional one-off monies that we receive, we need to do that because we're not going to get £37 million worth of cuts out on the 1st of April next year, and I will need some of that money to continue to balance the budget and keep us safe for a 114 notice whilst those cuts come out. The next slide, please, John. So in summary, February of this year, we set the budget and we knew we had £10 million of the 2-year strategy to get out, and the starting point was 16.5 million for 21-22, and we'd yet to do any detailed work on 22-23. We moved forward to September, and then a recast of that information that has been used to produce the information in the reports today. The 10 million still holds, those cuts are coming out, but the 16.5 has now become 37.2. And a look at 22-23, we're looking at a further 2.3 million. So that makes up the 39.5 million cuts that we're looking at over the next 2 years. So over 3 years, just short of £50 million. The next slide, please, John. This is a graphic that we've been using in many budget presentations, and it's to really sort of focus attention on Where we have opportunities to make reductions, to be more efficient, so other opportunities for new models of working, where can we manage our demand, where do we have opportunities to generate more income, where can we make best use of the assets that are held by the council. So we are using this in developing the options to meet that 39.5 million, but I think importantly is we cannot shy away from the fact that for many services and ways of working, we will either have to stop them or reduce them. We can look in some areas at delivering them in a different way, but quite clearly stopping and reducing is something that I think we have to be honest about, and that could be an option that is coming forward. The next slide, please, John. So in terms of how we've been approaching the task for next year, there's been a significant amount of lobbying through the leaders' meetings, chief execs, treasurers, etc., in terms of challenging GMCA to return some of the reserves that they are holding. Now, two of the bigger areas is, I mean, obviously, as the former Transport Authority, they do hold very large reserves for mainly capital for some of their schemes, but there are some reserves sat from the former Waste Authority, and we're looking at probably, I think, about £4 million coming back from those. They have reprioritised, they've assessed the risks that they are holding. So there will be some one-off back for that. And also in terms of retained business rates, so as part of the pooling arrangements around business rates, a certain top slice of any growth goes from each GM authority into that part, and it is used for approved priorities through the GMCA meetings. We have asked them to reprioritise all of those. There's been some very, very strong conversations. So again, any further returns of that money will help keep us away from section 114 territory. The council will no longer be able to make any additional severance payments. That's something that we have been able to offer in the past. There are simply no more reserves available for us to be able to offer that to any staff who are leaving the authority. And as Tony mentioned earlier, we need to start getting these cuts out now where we possibly can, because the more we can get out earlier, the less value of reserves that we will need to balance the budget into next year. Again, it keeps us more safely away from section 114 territory. So next slide, please. So as you will probably work out quite easily, some of the forecasting around our budget position in this year has been really, really difficult, because there is so much uncertainty about what the ongoing economic impact of COVID will be. We've got Brexit on the horizon. There are changes to furlough schemes coming along. And so we're going to have to keep a very, very close eye on the figures, particularly around council tax and business rates, because they are our two main sources of income. And the financial settlement. So the government has announced that towards the end of the year, they will be doing their spending announcements. Now that's at a departmental level, but we don't yet know at what point local authorities will be giving their individual financial settlements. Along with that, we will be given the notification around any increases in council tax and the business rates increase. We are hoping that we get that by the end of the calendar year, so that we get a little bit of time to consider any implications. The one thing that we do know is that it's going to be a one-year settlement. So any additional funding, which will hopefully come through, but we don't know, will help smooth the position. So it will buy us a little bit of time. But because it's only a one-year settlement, it will not permanently solve the problem. So at best, my expectation is it will help smooth the phasing of the cuts over a 2-year period. Next slide. Okay, so final slide from me before I hand back to the leader. So in terms of the timeline, obviously at Cabinet today, and the two reports summarising this presentation give the overall scene setting report and an update of the cuts that we are facing. The next Cabinet meeting on the 30th of November, there will be a report tabled which will give the options to achieve £39.5 million worth of cuts, and subject to that report's approval, we will then start the public strategic budget consultation on those proposals, and that will run for a period of 6 weeks from December through to early January. There is a cabinet scheduled for the 11th of January. Now, we may not need to bring a budget report to that meeting. Very much depends upon if there has been a significant alteration in the assumptions behind the budget position, and or if we have had a financial settlement, which again significantly changes the proposal. So the next planned update back to Cabinet will be on the 8th of February, and that is when there will be the report that you're all very used to seeing, which will be the post-consultation report, setting out the Cabinet's proposals on the budget, strategy and options for the next 2 years, and also the Cabinet's intentions around council tax for 21-22. And then that report will go forward to the full Budget Council meeting, which is scheduled for the 17th of February, where we will formally set the budget, 2-year strategy and the council tax for 21-22. So I will pause there. I'll pass back to yourself, Leader, and happy with myself and Tony to take any questions.
Thank you, Sue. Very sobering report, hugely challenging times for all of us. As a council, I think, as Tony pointed out, it's the worst period of time he's ever known in local government for us, having to make such savings, particularly at this time when we have all the additional pressures of COVID and all the lockdown pressures and all the pressures on the economy that we're seeing. So it's hugely challenging, and I just want to reiterate that I hope, I know there'll inevitably be disagreements in the forthcoming weeks and months over certain aspects, but I hope we can genuinely, where we can, work together. We've had one item today on GMSF where we have worked incredibly well together as different parties. We were very clear that we wanted all your groups briefed, which has taken place as soon as it was possible to have briefings on where we were economically, and we've done that both in the recovery board, but also your groups individually as well have had briefings. So and that commitment continues as we start to put details and meat on the bones, as it were, as we move forward. So you know, not just within the consultation, but I hope that we can work together positively in addressing how we face this incredible challenge. I don't think it can be underestimated. We all know, it doesn't need saying, but I will say we all know that we're starting from a base where we've already seen considerable savings and cuts to our services. So I will continue to put that point to government in terms of the settlement. I can't guarantee that I'll be listened to, but it's my responsibility to speak up and argue the point of the challenges we specifically face. And as Tony's pointed out, we do face this perfect storm this year. Nobody was to know this. We, when in opposition, were advocates of using reserves to defer some of the decisions, so it's no in any way criticism, but of course we now face some of those deferred savings from previous years on top of the additional pressures that we find because of the current climate we're living in. So I think we'll move on to some questions. Quite a few have indicated already. So first one to indicate was Councillor Hornby.
John, can you take the slides down, please? John Duckett. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Leader. I came into local government in 2006. I think that same year that you came into Councillor Greenwich. And in years, local government got harder and harder year by year. I think we're under no illusion there cannot be a 0% council tax increase this year under any circumstances. And I think all political parties will accept that. Just a few questions, really. Thank you, Sue, for a brilliant presentation. And I think I speak on behalf of all the leaders that whenever we've asked you over the last few weeks details with regard to the budget, and some of the questions you may well think are trivial or whatever, but you've always been there, you've always answered the question, and you've always been honest with us with regard to the situation, and that's all credit to you and to Tony as well with regard to how things have been done. With regard to GM, we know that GM are sitting on quite a considerable amount of reserve. Has had any detail with regard to how much reserve they've got, first of all, and then certainly the indication as well other authorities see that they can receive some of that money as well. And he mentioned earlier on in the presentation that you know, we're running into a loss. I think he said 10.5 million. Are we anticipating getting all the money back from the government with regard to our additional costs with regard to COVID? And the final point that I would like some clarification on is, as you know, prior to COVID and all the rest of it, we had agreed, and it was partly through the previous administration when we borrowed the £100 million, that was the kickstart to regenerating Bolton Town Centre with all the other investment that came in with that, or commitment to invest. With that, are we still in that healthy position where we can carry on with that? Because when COVID's over, that is going to be Bolton's future. That's going to be what's going to create that extra income coming into Bolton. And the final point I would like some assurances on is, I can't remember when we agreed to borrow additional monies for Manchester Airport in order to keep them afloat for the short period of time. What was the time scale involved with regard to before they would be in a position to start paying back that loan themselves, and we hopefully will be in a position where we can start receiving income? Sorry, it's quite lengthy, but that's the questions. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay, thank you. So, in order, hopefully I've got them all. I don't have the figure for total GM reserves, so I can certainly find that out. But there has been a significant amount of lobbying from all the local authorities within Greater Manchester. I know that the leader and the chief have had some very strong meetings in terms of reprioritising the money to return to us. So, and that is a consistent view across all the other local authorities, and we await the final figures from that one. In terms of the COVID costs, so in year, it's currently looking like we have had everything reimbursed to us. Certainly all the costs have been covered, and when we add all the additional funding in terms of loss of income, I think we're at the current point, all being equal, I think we're okay, and that has been reimbursed. But the issue for next year's budget is that 10.5 million it's that recurring impact, and we don't know if we're going to get any additional support next year for that, which is why we've had to build it into the budget. The 100 million loan, that is still okay. It was funded from income from the airport dividend, but we have separated the two, so the 100 million stays as is and then can be used to support the regeneration of the borough, but separately that then gives me an issue as how to repay it, which is why that 4.1 million, because some of that was for the loan, has been built in as a pressure into next year, but the 100 million is absolutely safe. And then your final question about the airport. So yes, we had approval for, in total, £12 million worth of shareholder funding going into the airport. They've called on 9 of that. There's an outstanding 3. There was a confidential briefing for treasurers with the airport last week where they said that they at the moment do not need that additional 3 million because they have been working extremely hard at selling assets and reducing their own costs. So at the moment they don't need that, but clearly as we get into next year we will just keep very close to them, but at the moment they don't need that. I mean, obviously they are another industry that's been extremely hard hit by COVID, travel restrictions. So they are not yet in a concrete position to tell us when they are able to start repaying the loans and then further down the line repaying the dividend. They were giving a sort of a tentative maybe in the next 1 to 2 years, but that is very, very tentative, and obviously they will burn. But we do have a very strong working relationship with them, so they are sharing a lot of information on a confidential basis, but I think it will probably be a couple of years before they'll start paying that loan interest back, and then further beyond that it will be a dividend. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Councillor Zaman.
Thanks, Leader. I have a question on section 114, but a brief comment before the question. I do want to say very briefly that if these cuts, as we've heard, are introduced, this would fundamentally change how local authority, how local government functions in Bolton, and it will almost certainly disrupt and devastate many lives. So before any of these decisions are taken, I think it's absolutely vital that we think our options through. But in terms of section 114 territory, Tony, this is a perfect storm, as you've said, and it's not just ourselves who are facing this perfect storm. Every local authority in the country is facing this this predicament, and I'm sure the government is aware of this. Now, is there any kind of indication at this stage that the government is going to intervene? Because this storm, I'm sure every local authority has got problems in dealing with, and we can't deal with that kind of scenario on our own in Bolton, for example. So are there any indications from civil servants or government in terms of, for example, setting deficit budget? There may be other options. I mean, the government does this all the time. So have you got anything on that? Thank you.
Okay, shall I pick it up and then Sue might add? Just wait for that. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Zaman. I mean, I think just to cover off some of your points, first of all about the impact on the council and services. You're absolutely right. This taking 37 million out is not an insubstantial amount of money. And again, no political comment on the back of what is now approaching 200 million that's come out over a number of years. So something has consequences. It's no different to running your household. If you suddenly find yourself 15 to 18% less income, something has got to be adjusted. The second thing is just to be absolutely clear before we talk about 114 is that in terms of the role that Sue has and I have and the corporate team, we can't work on any assumptions. We are statutorily in law required to set a balanced budget, not one that we think might be okay, not one that we think, well, we'll just wait and see what happens and we'll put a few figures out and we'll hope it all turns in a positive direction. We have to work on the facts and the information as we are faced today. And obviously we've been playing around with these numbers for a little while, but at the minute that's our best judgment. But we have to settle and agree at a fixed budget. In terms of what government might do from a kind of officer point of view, there is nothing that we are hearing at the minute that gives us a sense that, well, it's not going to be a problem. And even if there's a sort of settlement in the way that Sue described, which is 1 year, 1 year in one sense is very much appreciated, but 1 year is not a recurring budget. That's just 1 year bag of money and cash that we can use to apply against whatever the challenges are. It's very welcome, but we would welcome, which I think the LGA nationally have been saying for a while, for budgets to be set on 3-year cycles so you can plan on a more consistent and business-like basis. I know that the leader, I've seen this in operation, both in terms of the GM meetings and in conversations around COVID, has been lobbying hard in regards to the support that the council needs, and not just the council, but partners in the hospitality sector and businesses. And I think at the minute, I come back to where we started. We had no assumptions at the minute, no information that suddenly means that the local government will be looked at more preferably than any other part of the system, and certainly not just Bolton Council, and therefore we have to work on the options that we have. But as I said in my opening remarks, regardless of who politically is running this council, these options are not going to run away, the choices are not going to run away. They will still be £37 million worth of in inverted commas cuts and decisions that will need to be made. But you know, we hope and pray that if investment does happen, then that will help us greatly. But we're beholden to central government and partners politically across GM to lobby as hard as we can. Right, so I don't know, Sue, is there anything you want to add to that? Sorry, Leader.
Yeah, I think, you know, to just support what the Chief has just said, in the government have openly said to local authorities, if you are in danger of entering Section 114 territory, please contact us. However, it is incumbent upon me in my statutory role, on the Chief, on all of us really, to try and manage this ourselves, because the first thing the government will do is send people in to look at our levels of reserves, to look at where we could make cuts in their view. It's a process that we are obviously going through at the moment, and I would much rather that the financial challenge for this council was done by people who, you know, live, work in the borough. It's the people on this call, rather than people who come in who don't know Bolton, who don't care about Bolton in the way that we do. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to get this done and to see us through the next couple of years in the best way for Bolton. Otherwise, the government will just come in and do it to us, and I don't think that's in anybody's interests. I'll pass back to you, Leader.
Thank you, Sue. And I mean, I will just reiterate that I will make government aware of the challenges we face and some of the, I'm going to say, impossible decisions and alternatives that we're faced with. And, you know, I'm sure the last administration will appreciate this. These are very difficult times. I know how hard you will have found some of the cuts you had to and savings that you had to bring in. And I know there would be red lines, and I know that sometimes those red lines would have to be contemplated because of the sheer nature of the level of cuts that you were dealing with. Yes, we are now in that position, on top of all the other savings that have happened within the council. And I suppose we have approached this in a way that is looking very much at benchmarking with other local authorities to see where they are, that we are very much in line, and in many cases still delivering, I don't want to compare, you know, in favourably, but still delivering what would be a fair response compared to other authorities on certain issues and in certain departmental services. I mean, our aim is to always try and deliver these cuts through innovation, through trying to make sure that the frontline delivery is not adversely affected. But when you're dealing with this level of savings, this is inevitably very hard to do. And what I would say to all political parties is, undoubtedly, as we progress and there's, as I say, more meat on the bones and more detail, There will be, you know, opportunities for you to obviously oppose certain measures. But what I would say is, in the spirit, what we need, because we have been looking at different proposals, I would say please come up with an alternative, because we are quite willing to change a view if you can come up with something that we have not already considered. And that is not, you know, we're not saying that we have all the answers. Officers are not saying they have all the answers. And if you as individual groups say, well, actually, instead of that, could we not do that? Rather than saving it for the grandstanding circus and pantomime that is often full council, if we can have those honest debates in a public arena, still, you know, it can still show that you're fighting for the town. We can have those debates, and you can say, well, instead of that, what about that? Because, you know, we are very much, whoever in the future runs this council, they will have to run it following these decisions. So we are faced with some really challenging decisions over the next few weeks as we put, you know, considerable detail to them. You will of course be briefed on them, and we look forward to your you know, your input as we move forward. But incredibly, as I've said before, it doesn't need saying again, incredibly challenging, and it is inevitable that some service delivery will be effective. Some compromises will have to be made because of the sheer level of cuts that we're looking for this year. So hope that's answered. Councillor Hayes.
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. Can I just deal firstly with 2 points that Tony made? He mentioned cuts of 190 million. As if cuts only started in 2010. That's when big ones started, but I've been on the council a fair amount of time, and we've had cuts virtually every year. I mean, I found another 30 million of cuts going back to when the Lib Dem administration was here, which wasn't that long ago, although it seems a long time ago now. The other point I'd like to tell you is, yes, it's going to be difficult getting agreement across 8 groups. I've got no doubt of that. But if the will is there and people are prepared to listen, I think we're in with a chance of doing it. My group actually has developed a statement which I'd like to read out, if you don't mind, before I go on to a more general point. It's only 5 paragraphs, it won't take very long. And the statement is, expecting a council to make further cuts approaching 40 million is a near impossible task, particularly in the context of the massive cuts we've been forced to make year on year, going back into the last century. These cuts are caused by a Conservative government which has little respect for what local government does, particularly in the north of England. They are also contributed by the government's incompetence in dealing with many of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, such as the failing track and trace system, which has so far cost the country £12 billion. The cuts will have to be made whichever party is in control in Bolton. We believe it is better that elected Bolton councillors decide on the cuts to make than to allow appointed government commissioners to come in and make them for us, which is what will happen if we fail to do it. The Liberal Democrat group will play a full and constructive part in the process, concentrating on doing our best to protect essential frontline services, the more vulnerable in our society, and local businesses. Unfortunately, the scale of these cuts imposed by central government mean it is inevitable that those groups will suffer to some extent. We will fully support attempts to get the government to give extra support, including recompensing Bolton for all lost income, including from the airport dividends. That's the end of the statement. I'd like to make a couple of other comments. I think it's very fair of us to thank Sue and her staff and Tony and everybody else involved in all the hard work they're doing, and to thank them very much for the briefings they've given, which, as I think Sean said, have been very honestly answered. Since this paper is drawn up, the situation, I believe, has probably worsened. Tier 3, then a lockdown of at least a month, will have a further massive impact on our finances. And when we talked earlier in the year in a confidential meeting, for the details anyway, about the loans to Manchester Airport, we were presented with what they believed then was a worst case scenario. I suspect it may be even worse than that. I think this is going on longer and they will be in more of difficulty. I'm glad to hear of all the savings they're making, and I'm sure they've been very proactive, but we've got to believe that rather than things getting better, okay, we might get more government support, we might get more from central government, but I think the pockets are pretty empty at the moment. I think we have to prepare ourselves for possibly even worse circumstances than Sue at the moment is saying. So with that, I'd like to finish and again repeat thanks to all the officers for what you're doing.
Well, I think it's thanks, Roger. I'll have to just reserve my right on that. All I would say, Roger, is that as long as I've been involved, and I've been involved in a long time. You've been on the council longer than me, Roger. But you know, I think that local government has always been the poor relation, whichever colour of government has been in control. And you yourself have just actually referred to savings that go much further back than 2010. And of course it would be remiss. I know that you've channeled your frustration and your group at the Conservative government, and I'm thankful it's not too channeled at the Conservatives locally. So I will channel mine to the Liberals nationally, if I may, and remind you, of course, that the Liberals played a part from 2010 to 2015, a very active part, when some of the cuts that you talk about, decimation, were actually taking place. So I think it would be remiss if I didn't point that out as well. I think, as I've said, it is, I think, a responsibility of us all now to lobby to get the awareness of government, which has not always been there, particularly, I'm going to say it, in the north and the extra challenges that exist in the north. It's, you know, and that's where, you know, I hope to play a role. I think it's a hard battle to fight, because especially at this time when we can see what the economic situation is within the country as a whole. But I will certainly do my best to make them aware of the challenges that we face disproportionately in the north. That's all I can do without making, as you know, I don't like making promises that I can't keep. I'll make the promise to make that case. I unfortunately am not in a position to be able to say that it will be listened to the degree that I would maybe hope. But I think, I hope locally we can still maintain that ability to work constructively together, with all views respected, and for us to reach and to get through what is undoubtedly, as Tony and Sue have both said, is an incredibly difficult scenario. So I shall now bring in Councillor Howarth.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader. I'll wait for the red line. OK. Thanks very much. So item 7, of course, was an item for comments, and 8's your approval item. I do have some questions and just a few comments, in the sense that, yes, of course, the government could do more on the fiscal challenges, could they not? The government's social care green paper is nowhere to be seen. And it does look like social care investment in England is now around 8% less than it was in 2010. You've just been talking about those years. Certainly, councils like Bolton need to call on the government not to let social care down going forward. I'd be grateful for any feedback on that. My understanding is that the government has written off debt for NHS bodies before. So it was knocking around my mind as to whether that might be a position for local authorities. Again, there's already been some discussion on this call about how much the government actually values local authorities, local government. And I think their there is something that sort of stand out. So I'm wondering if any of those in local government finance, for example, whether that is being raised about the fact that other parts of the public sector have had debt written off. And I want to just, sorry about this, get to the next bit. Again, another side of the people services, youths, families in struggle. There are actually a lot of reports in local government. Again, this speaks to the testimony of the good work of local government. That it's actually good value for money for taxpayers for those types of services that local government provides. Now, the government are funding new Kickstart. Again, those of you on the call have been raising the terrible effects of COVID-19, and it's just been raised. We're in another lockdown that's going to hit the council more. But looking at the finance in the round for things like youths and families, so we've got the funding for Kickstart, but my view is the civil servants are well aware, they know that intervention is needed earlier in children's lives, ipso facto families, of course, and anything you can feed back on that around the finance of the children's services, clearly, and the fact that we have a lot of demand. Forgive me, right. There's been an announcement about 100 million, a fund to support council leisure centres. And my presumption is that that might make some contribution to addressing the financial pressures that we're facing here. Anything you can say on that would be very welcome, please. The government, of course, could support the airport sector. It's a choice the government is making. They could support it with finance to get through this recession. I'm not aware that that's happening at all. Something that I've been made aware of that may well be something that we hear more about from the public here is that there are, because we've heard about it in the council chamber, there's new increased drop-off and pick-up charges for vehicles at Manchester Airport. And that's quite high, I'm afraid, and it feels really hard for the private hire trade that they would, in their position, pass that cost on to customers. So I'm grateful to hear whether you've heard anything about that affects, well, it affects the public in Bolton. I believe these charges for about an hour are higher than the rate of pay for the living wage that I think I'm hearing. It's £12 an hour that has shot up to. I don't think I'm going off the subject because I think these things absolutely relate to our budget and finance matters. We've got the 3 years of phasing to stretch the collection fund. Again, this is a comment about what the government could and can't, could do, could not do, could consider doing to help the fiscal position in Bolton. Now, this is the 3 years mainly where we're getting a compensation system really for the loss of our income around sales fees and charges. I don't see why that couldn't be made longer. Is there no thought that might even go up to 5 years? You know, anything that can occur that can give more space, if you like, to do financial planning for our senior officers would benefit this council enormously. The government, of course, could let councils balance their budgets over a longer period than 12 months. I mean, make no mistake, I and everybody else on the call wants this government to invest in this council. I mean, you know, you could say that's what we want and end of. However, if that is an issue, which it certainly appears to be, unless there is some movement from the government, then I'm right, am I not, that it's the only ministry where this is required, where we have to have that budget for a 12-month period. I know we're able to do the financial planning for 2-year budgets, and I know that that's been done very successfully in Bolton, but there are other government departments where they can organise their finance over longer periods. And I was thinking, you know, the Department for Transport can do that. So why can't councils that are part of the ministry for communities and local government do that as well? Why can't we have longer to make it easier for local government? The Secretary of State has described work done by local government staff as an absolutely heroic job. This is all the work that's going on. He's been praising the hard work of all the frontline staff to meet the needs of the COVID pandemic in local communities. It's no surprise that I'm angry, as well as others on the call, that the Prime Minister, along with ministers, is putting this council, though, in the position of losing those staff and losing services that are highly valued in this borough, and that many people have spoken about on the call. And this is the awful situation that we're now facing, that the services that they talk of and the staff that they praise, we now have to look at with such a terrifically difficult deficit budget situation. Thanks very much, Leader.
Tony, Sue, do you want to come back on some of those initial points? Yes, Sue.
Yeah.
First.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howard. So I think I've got all of those down. In terms of social care pressures for both adults and children, I mean, you're absolutely right. Part of the reason that the cuts total is so high into next year is having to build in the budgets to recognise that demand. There is an awful amount of lobbying that is ongoing and has been for many years. I don't think Bernie was able to be on the meeting today. I know through the Director of Children's Services, they have been lobbying extremely hard. Director of Adult Services through Rachel. We are constantly doing returns into government around these questions. Now, obviously, it was partially recognised a few years ago with the social care precept, but clearly that is a precept on the council tax. It isn't direct government funding. I think if anything that could be done on a permanent basis to recognise the social care needs, I think that would be fabulous, but we are lobbying extremely hard and have been for quite a while. In terms of the write-off of debt, it's not something that I've heard spoken about for local authorities. Obviously, I think sometimes I'm no expert on NHS finance, but I know that their deficit positions have been written off as opposed to ours. But it could be an action in terms of extending collection fund period as well. I think that's something that I know Treasurer authorities, societies across the country have been raising with MHCLG just to see is that something, because clearly 3 years was great. Could it be extended up to say 5? Because as you're right, it allows us that extended period just to recover, but no response yet on that. In terms of, Kickstart, yes, you're absolutely right, that programme where we will receive a small amount of money to be able just to support people, younger people, just get some work experience. It's something that the council is interested in. So we've only last week contacted our heads of service just to see if they have any opportunities available. We don't know in this new world of working what we are able to do, but we are certainly asking our services if we can support any young people to do that, because it is a great initiative. Leisure centre funding, now we don't actually believe that will help in Bolton, because our understanding is it's for direct provision by local authorities of leisure centres, and because obviously the leisure centres within Bolton are provided by a trust arrangement, we don't believe that funding is accessible by them. Airport funding, no, you're absolutely right. There has been no national funding given to the airport sector. There was obviously comments early on that shareholders should help these organisations. Now, yes, the comment was made, shareholders are happy to take the dividend in the good times. They need to support their organisations in the bad times. Yes. I think that recognition needs to be given that within Manchester it is a unique position. We've been owners of the airport for many years. It was done as the right thing to do, because it is it brings fantastic benefits to the local area, supply chain, local employment, etc. We didn't go in as an investment opportunity. But we, as a shareholder, have done the right thing to support the airport group. Yeah, but you know, I think even they, I know, you know, the representatives from Manchester Airport are lobbying hard of the government as a sector, so they are pushing really hard, and I know that it has been raised. I think one of our local MPs raised it early on as well in discussions in Westminster. Yeah, I think some really valid points raised there, many of which we have been forwarded, I know, onto government in terms of any ideas at all to support our budget. I'll pass back to you, Leader.
Thanks, Sue, and very detailed as usual. Thank you, Tony. Was there anything you wanted to add there?
No, Leader, that's fine, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Next question I've got, Councillor Cox.
Thank you, David. I'll be brief and try and be succinct. I don't need any. It's a comment more than a question. We've had a bit of you know, discussion about help from the government, and I suppose, you know, they're there to be criticised, but you know, we should just point out in the first 5 months of this year, I was just double checking it. The government has borrowed £174 billion. You know, its foot is to the floor in terms of support that it's given right across the board. Nearly every sector is looking for support. So I don't think the government has been shy in terms of turning on the taps. This was not a problem of their creating. It's an existential crisis that is occurring across Europe. A lot of people gave the government a huge kicking about not locking down too soon. They locked down too late, and examples were given of other countries that locked down sooner. Many of those countries who locked down sooner in the summer have infection rates that are equal to or higher than ours. Governments across the world are wrestling with this problem, and this council, like many organisations, faces a very difficult fiscal situation. I think it was Councillor Hayes who said it earlier. This is a problem that can be sorted one of two ways. We, as locally elected politicians from 8 different parties, can come together and find a local solution to this problem. The alternative is for the government to step in and solve the problem for us, and they will do it quickly, and they will do it brutally, and they will do it with very little local knowledge. So I think, of course, you know, opposition parties are there to criticise, and I've done plenty of it in the past, but this is a existential crisis for the country. It's a crisis for this authority, as it is for thousands of organisations across the country, and I think it's really incumbent and really important that local councillors, from whatever their party they're from, try and resolve this problem locally, because the only alternative is to get other people to do that, and that would be a failure of this organisation. And you know, every time this council has had a problem, local councillors have normally come together, and I hope they do it in this case. Thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you, Martin. There's no other indications to speak. So the recommendations, Cabinet, are before you, as on both sets of order papers, mainly for noting the fiscal position. Can I just ask you to agree to those recommendations, please?
Aye.
I agreed.
Aye.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's business of Cabinet. Thanks to everyone for their contributions, and to those that have watched online. I declare the meeting closed.
Can those who are on Chief Officer's appointments panel join that meeting straight away, please? Thank you very much. John Duckett, can you end the live meeting, please?